Last big moment in the political spotlight captured so many of the complexities of his character. A stubborn man who survived many a brush with death, who spent a lifetime looking for moments to shine as a leader and put country first. Yet forever a hot dog fighter pilot with dramatic flair and white-knuckle political instincts.
Minutes ago, thanking a laundry list of people before officially signing the John S. McCain National Defense Authorization Act. One person who wasn't on that list of people that he thanked, outspoken Trump critic and the namesake of the bill, Senator John McCain. You know, the decorated war hero who was a prisoner of war, continues to serve as a United States Senator, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. The bill the president signed, it's called the John S. McCain National Defense Authorization Act. No mention of him by the president today. Today, McCain took the high road and issued a statement saying, "I'm humbled that my colleagues in Congress chose to designate this bill in my name. Serving as chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee and working on behalf of America's brave service members has been one of the greatest honors of my life." One person who was clearly thinking of him during the ceremony, his wife, Cindy McCain, who tweeted, "I'm so proud of Senator John McCain and his work on NDAA. Incredibly humbled at the naming of this after my husband. And since President Trump would not do it, let us here on the lead congratulate Senator John McCain and his family and thank him for his service to the..."
About character and John McCain, a fellow Navy man. Before we get into North Korea, give us your thoughts on the life and the legacy of a great man.
Huge loss for the nation, as we've been discussing, but if I may, an enormous loss for the U.S. Navy. Son and grandson of four-star admirals, really part of the naval aristocracy, served so bravely in Vietnam. But what we treasure about John McCain are the memories of him as the rebel with a cause, particularly when he was a midshipman at the Naval Academy. He went over the wall, in other words, went AWOL more than anybody else. He got more demerits than anybody else. He dated more women than anybody else. He was a legend at the Naval Academy, and that legend pulled through to his service, his incredible heroism, as you've talked about so much. You know, if I could put it in terms of a compass, because in the Navy we're always thinking about being at sea, he could look east and west, right? He was someone who could look to the right and the left politically, but he always sailed true north. And we knew that in the Navy. You know what?
He won, and he was there for 36 years. He died over the weekend. Now, does this mean that everything that John McCain did was amazing politically? No, I disagreed with John McCain routinely. Most recently, when John McCain gave the thumbs down to what they called skinny repeal, the repeal of large parts of the Obamacare package, including the individual mandate. And he said he did that because he didn't approve of the way the Senate was running. He was a guy who was constantly talking about the rules of the Senate, even though the Democrats were constantly breaking those rules. But John McCain overall understood that America was an exceptional place, and he put his life on the line in order to prove that America was an exceptional place. He certainly understood the threat that was posed to America by outside actors. He understood the threat that was posed to America by places like Russia. There's a reason that Russia today basically ran a bunch of smears against him or ignored him after his death. None of that is particularly a shock. Sarah, how can we...
Job to do what John McCain did. Never willingly fit. Never lie down and quit. Make a fuss. Make everyone work harder. In fact, you can measure a life by the size of the hole needed to accommodate it. Make sure yours is McCain-sized. There are people whose exit leaves a Grand Canyon-sized space that can never truly be filled. Senator McCain left that space. And while condolences may often feel trite, they can help fill that space, especially when there are millions of them. Senator McCain was foremost an independent thinker, a round peg in the world capital of square holes. He owned his thoughts, critics be damned. His experiences taught him to shrug off stuff that would have left us in tears. 5.5 years in a prison camp will do that to you. And that's real diversity. He was feisty, funny, and real. We need a good John McCain, and not just every generation, but every day. Somebody who reminds us that we don't all have to act the same, and who knows that there is a difference between a good idea and the latest idea. The earth is covered in cemeteries, endless green acres of rectangular holes. There's one near you and in your future. But if there's an army of round pegs, filling square holes won't be easy. In life, be a John McCain. Be a little less predictable tomorrow than you were today.
For Trump to run about 1 million times next year, isn't it? This stuff doesn't play outside of San Francisco. That's a cult meeting inside that conference
John, I know
hall.
you don't have a return trip. I'm trying to figure out why you're putting John McCain's face up.
Okay, and the off chance the president's watching, real heroes out there, Pete Buttigieg, others that have served this country. Just a thought.
Okay, all right. This went off.
That old Beach Boys song, Bomberan. Bom, bom, bom. Anyway.
It's lost for now. But Idlib and Hama and Qusair and Deraa and other cities in Syria could still be saved. But time is running out. Assad's forces are on the march. Providing military assistance to the Free Syrian Army and other opposition groups is necessary. But at this late hour, that alone will not be sufficient to stop the slaughter and save innocent lives. The only realistic way to do so is with foreign air power.
And to our distinguished witnesses this morning, that I've been a member of this committee for many years, and I have never seen anything as disgraceful and outrageous and despicable as the last demonstration that just took place about, you know, you're going to have to shut up or I'm going to have you arrested. If we can't get the Capitol Hill police in here immediately, get out of here, you low-life scum.
Dana, these people were physically threatening Henry Kissinger. I'm used to people popping up at these hearings and yelling, and then they're escorted out. That's at least some version of free speech. These people rushed up. They were right next to Henry Kissinger, waving handcuffs up. He's a 91-year-old man with a broken shoulder who was willing to come down and testify before Congress to give us the benefit of his many years of wisdom. Of course I was outraged, and I am still outraged. It's one thing to stand up and protest. It's something else to physically threaten an individual, particularly an individual who has served so much to his country, whether you agree or not. As I happen to believe he's one of the great statesmen of my lifetime, or maybe of the whole 20th century.
Before I came on, and there is one important point that has been left out of that conversation, because the fact is we had the conflict won. The surge had succeeded, and by the way, when we were failing in Iraq, I called for the firing of Donald Rumsfeld because of the lack of leadership and the failure in Iraq. We had it won. With thanks to the surge and thanks to General David Petraeus, we had it won. And then the decision was made by the Obama administration to not have a residual force in Iraq. Those are just facts. We had it won, and I predicted in 2011 when we left that there would be failure and a colossal failure. So all of those worst fears that Lindsey Graham and I and Joe Lieberman had have come true, and it didn't have to happen because we had the conflict won.
So do not go out and seek, regulations are, you do not go out and seek to find out someone's sexual orientation.
But Senator, that's
you
not
do
the
not. That is the fact. That is the fact. I mean, I know the military very well, and I know what's being done. And what is being done is that they are not seeking out people who are gay. And I don't care what you say. I know it's a fact.
That's not what I say.
I don't care what you say, and I don't care what others say. I've seen it in action. I've seen it in action. I have sons in the military. I know the military very well. So they're not telling you the truth.
So Senator, just to make sure,
we do not go out and seek out, find out whether someone, no one goes out to see whether someone is.
Private emails are not being searched.
We do not go out and see if someone is gay or not. We do not go out and find out whether someone is gay or not. I don't know if they are or not. I know they don't go out and
There's documented cases.
They do not. They do not. They do not. You can say that they are. You can say that pigs fry. It's not true.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah, I'd like to.
That is the case of Mike Almy, Senator.
Bring him to the office. Bring him to our office. It is not the policy. It is not the policy.
But it is the case that it's happening, Senator.
It is not the policy. It's not the policy. It's not the policy. It's not the policy. You can say that it is the policy, sir, if you choose to. It's not the policy. I'll be glad to get that to you in writing.
We should be doing airstrikes now. We should be
look, the crisis of Maliki's leadership is a political problem. The imminent crisis is the military movement of ISIS that can even threaten Baghdad. And by the way, you can take out targets in the middle of the desert. It's not that difficult.
But
the president's announcement was, we'll wait a few days and see what happens. They are an existential threat, and they are winning, and we have to help.
When you say existential threat, what does that mean? The United States is to be destroyed?
No, it means that what General Clapper has said is what's happening in that area, the Iraq-Syria area, where ISIS and al-Qaeda are located, that they will be planning attacks on the United States of America.
John McCain, reaching for the worst possible insult for President Obama earlier this year, said this: "I have never seen anything like this in my life. I thought Jimmy Carter was bad, but he pales in comparison to this president, in my opinion." The serious question out of that is, what does it feel like, and what is your response to these moments of being used as an insult, your legacy being used as an insult?
That's a compliment to me coming from a warmonger. I was lucky enough when I was president to keep our country at peace and to provide peace for others. I was lucky enough to go through my 4 years. We never dropped a bomb. We never fired a missile. We never shot a bullet.
An article expressing support for President Nixon and the U.S. bombing of Cambodia. After McCain's election to the U.S. Senate in 1987, he consistently promoted war and U.S. military intervention abroad, including in the first Gulf War, Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as Iran. Here is Senator McCain.
To deify a person who had just died, and it doesn't...
Well, certain people.
Yes. Yeah. And this...
Almost everybody.
It's not helpful. Look, the guy just died. He has family. He died of cancer. It was sad and tragic. So you don't need to go out of the way to vilify him at that moment. But let's just try... at his funeral, you can eulogize him, talk about all the great things he's done, and not mention the bad things. But if you're part of the media and you're just covering the legacy of John McCain, it's a complicated legacy. He's done, some good things, some bad things. I think, McCain-Feingold, there's a Keating 5. There's he's against torture, but he was pro-war.
Yeah.
So it's complicated, but let's not pretend he's some sort of amazing politician who is, we have to mourn his loss forever. Well, we can mourn his loss, that's fine. But I just don't like the deification of politicians. It's absurd.
He wasn't a human.
It's really natural to have a lot of empathy for someone who suffered through brain cancer, admiration for people who withstood great hardships with pride and determination. However, what we've seen is really what could be called the phenomenon of obit omit, obituaries that are flagrantly in conflict with the real historical record. And when you stop and think about it, journalism is supposed to be the first draft of history. And when history is falsified in the way that we're getting in the last couple of days now, several days really, in the lead up to Senator McCain's death, it's really a kind of a fraudulence on the part of the U.S. mass media. If John McCain was a maverick, it's only a high jump over very low standards. And while there were certainly some, from a progressive standpoint, admirable characteristics that he had, he also was a huge enthusiast for war, which included after his return from being a prisoner in Vietnam.
Truer words have never been spoken about John McCain. It's a well-known fact. I love that John McCain is slamming somebody else's legacy. Meanwhile, he is totally clueless. He has no idea that when he passes away, the only thing he's going to be known for is being an insane warmonger. Now, don't get me wrong. In many respects, he is a hero because he was tortured in Vietnam and he has an incredible personal story in many respects. But one of the biggest things he's going to be remembered for when he passes away is that he lost it later on in his life when he wanted to invade every country. I mean, who put together a list? I think it was Mother Jones. They put together a list of all the different countries that McCain wants to invade. And it's like a dozen. You're not going to be remembered positively, John, if that's the legacy that you want to leave. So settle down a little bit, son, on criticizing other people's legacies.
Against John McCain, who has been
in my opinion, not so hot. And I supported him. I supported him for president. I raised $1 million for him. It's a lot of money. I supported him. He lost. He let us down. But, he lost. So I never liked him as much after that because I don't like losers. But Frank, let me get to it. He hit me. He's not a war hero. He's a war hero. He's a war hero. 5.5 years. He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured, okay? I hate to tell you.
There's no end to what a bad guy Donald Trump is. What a monster. And the Republican voters saw that and they're like, that's our monster. We like that guy who spits on people who were tortured by our enemies. There's a way to disagree with John McCain without smearing his record. Look, now to be fair to him, was not captured in Vietnam. The reason for that is because, like a coward, he ran. First, he was in school. That's fine. He got 4 deferments, but his 5th deferment was for bone spurs. When asked which foot he had the bone spurs in, he said, I don't know, maybe both. His daddy wrote him a doctor's note, which was obviously a lie. One of many fictitious doctor's notes to follow in Trump's notorious career. And McCain clarified that last fall he said that Trump never apologized for his insulting remark.
This is the guy who said his own personal Vietnam was avoiding STDs at the orgies he went to. Now, listen, do I agree with Trump when he goes after John McCain? He's a hero because he's captured. I like people who weren't captured, okay? No, that guy's an idiot and that's a stupid thing to say. But I'm also so over the fucking blind and mindless reverence of, oh, John McCain. Oh, you're so perfect in every way. Oh, sir, did you pass gas? Because if you did, it doesn't even smell good, sir. Oh, it's so perfect. Oh, John McCain. I'm so sick of it. I'm so sick of it. The dude has never met a fucking war he didn't like. He's never met a war he didn't like. He's always pushing for more war. Oh, he's a gentleman. That's what he is. So there's no... By the way, this kind of stuff helps Trump. It does. Because when everybody lines up to criticize him and the substance of your criticism is fucking stupid and your criticism is totally unmerited, that helps him.
I mean, what are your views of John McCain? It was a disgraceful remark from a draft-dodging then presidential candidate Donald Trump. But let's be clear, the Trump-McCain rivalry, animosity, which the media have been focusing on a lot, especially this morning with the flags back at full staff at the White House, and this Washington Post report about Trump refusing to call him a hero and changing the statement and not saying anything positive about McCain. I mean, look, that is Donald Trump being the petty man-child that we know he is. And in fact, John McCain benefited from the fact that Donald Trump hated him because it made him even more popular with the media, who could play this. The media loves, rows and personalities and disagreements. So the idea of McCain being this anti-Trump figure was great for them. And Trump and McCain obliged by giving them great rhetoric attacking Trump. But when you look at the record, if you look at the actual voting record that 538 put together, McCain voted with Trump 80% of the time since 2016. He wasn't some great rebel in actions. The thing about John McCain was he was great at rhetoric. The actions didn't always match the rhetoric, and that is what the media gave him cover for. Norman's right. The media have a lot to answer for when it comes to McCain. McCain cultivated the media. A lot of reporters on Twitter over the last couple of days have been saying he was their friend, which is a weird phrase to use for a politician. And McCain himself called the media my base. That's how he got his reputation as a maverick. That's how he's getting all this hagiographical coverage right now on the cable news channels from right and left alike.
Rights community lost a champion. That's by Jennifer Rubin.
What does that have to do with John McCain?
What you tell me? Is there,
I thought that was an Onion title. Honestly,
the human rights community lost it. There's never the guy voted against MLK's holiday about 6 times. That John Lewis, Representative John Lewis, says that the McCain-Palin rallies reminded him of Wallace. George Wallace's rallies. That's what Barack Obama said. He drew a direct line from Sarah Palin and John McCain to Donald Trump. This is what they said while he was alive. But now he's dead. The human rights community lost a champion. So this is why people don't, believe the media, and they have no trust in politicians. Because that's why would I bother to read that? Why would I bother to read somebody who says John McCain was a human right? John McCain never met a war he didn't like. He hooked up with fascists in the Ukraine. He's hooking up with ISIL.
in Syria to kill people. He likes killing. John McCain was a bloodthirsty maniac his whole life. And the fact that he had he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam during an illegal war, it doesn't change the fact that it didn't change him to be a better person. Being a prisoner of war didn't change him. It did help him be against torture. So tip of the hat there. But that's like saying, hey, did you know John McCain was against rape? So we should give him some. You're supposed to be against torture. You don't get points for being against torture. So I just wanted to show you that.
I want you to get me wrong. I don't agree with John McCain's policies. And so he has and always will be a warmonger. And so I'm not here to praise John McCain. Of
course, we had issues with John McCain. He was a war hawk, all of that. You know, it's not like war hawk. Yes, he said some pretty terrible things about the Asian community in the past.
Yeah,
so
he was mostly
calm down.
bad. He was the vast majority bad.
Yes.
He was almost entirely bad.
The same thing with John McCain. John McCain is one of the biggest warmongers in Washington, D.C., yet because he occasionally says that he doesn't like Donald Trump, liberals, Democrats are willing to say like, hey, maybe he's not such a bad guy. No, he is. Because while he says one thing about Donald Trump, still voted in favor of all of his nominees and has supported every single policy that he has put out. Stop praising asshole Republicans who've helped to destroy this country.
Unrepentant warmonger. Politically, he was disastrous. The one good decision he made, one was being anti-torture because he was tortured, and the other one was, at the very last second, saving Obamacare. The only reason he did it is because him and President Trump have personal disagreements with each other. It was over petty personal politics that he was like, yeah, okay, I'll save millions of people healthcare. But the idea that you glorify this guy, Jesus fucking Christ, man. You're on the left. Be on the left. He's a hero, bro. You know, John McCain. Here's my silent protest. Here's a picture of the great man, John McCain. He's so wonderful. Like, who are you appealing to? What are you doing? You're just doing a segment where the whole point is to make the idiot Morning Joe cast cheer for you while the rest of the country's like, what the fuck are you doing?
I think Norman's right to point to the obit-omit phenomenon. I think that's one of the things I've taken away from the past couple of days, just watching some of the media coverage, which is less journalism and more hagiography. We know what McCain was good at and what he was praised for, but we're not hearing about some of the darker sides of his political record. And there's nothing wrong with bringing some light to the darker parts of a politician's, a public figure's record. This is not some sort of dancing on his grave. This is talking about what he did. And, you know, look at his career. He was a man who was involved in a massive financial scandal in the late 1980s. He was part of the Keating Five, the savings and loan scandal. He agitated, as you mentioned, Amy, in your introduction, for the illegal and catastrophic invasion and occupation of Iraq. Never apologized, never showed any regret for that. In 2008, he ran a nasty, desperate, and bigoted campaign for the presidency of the United States alongside Sarah Palin, which, as you pointed out again, did pave the way for the election of Donald Trump and for Trumpism in 2016. These are things he should be held to account for. You also mentioned his famous and welcome vote, last-minute vote, I should add, against Obamacare last year. Sorry, in defense of Obamacare, saving Obamacare in a way last year. But we don't talk about his vote for the big Trump tax cuts, which also involved the killing of the Obamacare individual mandate. He was not a maverick, as Norman says. He was a maverick in name only.
We had constantly been lobbying John McCain to not support all these wars. Amy, I think it's so horrible to be calling somebody a war hero because he participated in the bombing of Vietnam. I just spent the last weekend with Veterans for Peace, people who are atoning for their sins in Vietnam by trying to stop new wars. John McCain hasn't done that. With his life, what he did was support wars from not only Iraq, but also Libya. He called John Kerry delusional for trying to make a nuclear deal with Iran. And so threw his lot in with the MEK, the extremist group in Iran. He also was a good friend of Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudis. There was a gala for the Saudis in May when the Crown Prince was visiting, and they had a special award for John McCain. He supported the Saudi bombing in Yemen that has been so catastrophic. And I think we have to think that those who have participated in war are really heroes if they spend the rest of their lives trying to stop war, not like John McCain, who spent the rest of his life supporting war.
According to John McCain, I'm sure that if I were to check U.S. military death statistics per month, we had 3 or 4 years of just stability and prosperity where there was no violence whatsoever. They had it won.
So, yeah, my main question as I was listening to that jackass is, what did you win? What did you win? What did we win? We won what? Democracy in Iraq? We won beating Al-Qaeda in Iraq that didn't exist in Iraq? What did we win?
Mission accomplished.
We had a stable government that had no hostility, but number one, there was hostilities throughout. There was, before all this happened, there was car bombing after car bombing from day one while we were there, after we left, to today. There was 800 people killed last month in Iraq. And so did he think we solved the Shia-Sunni problems in Iraq, let alone in the Middle East? You idiot. What did we win? What did we win? Oh, we kicked their ass for a little while, and then we went from a massacre after massacre to slightly less violence. Victory for war, yay!
And the only way to continue on that streak was to leave Americans there for the foreseeable future.
Which is exactly what he wants, because he's a puppet. Whether he knows it or not, he's a puppet for the military-industrial complex. No one wants more war, more spending on war than John McCain does. So anytime there's an opportunity, yes, let's arm the Syrian rebels. Oops, they just took over Iraq. Let's arm the Iraqi government to fight the Syrian rebels that I argued earlier that we should arm. Arm everybody. Oh, look at that. My political benefactors, my donors and the defense contractors got super rich arming everybody. What a wild coincidence. That's his real motive.
That, Cenk. But I think beyond that point, what annoys me the most about John McCain, for somebody who, yes, he is a war hero, he knows what it is to be in harm's way, and for him to sit there, knowing what he knows, knowing what his family went through, to say, I'm going to subject other American boys and girls to the same type of treatment, blows my mind. And it's just the same broken record. Anytime we can go to war with anybody, if Djibouti steps on somebody's foot, he's like, oh, we need to go, we need to arm the rebels in Djibouti. It's just a great idea, arm, and it does not solve the problem. And I'm happy we never elected him as president, because we in 8,000 wars right now, literally.
But you know what?
To further arm the conflict from the Hill. That's right, good old Johnny Boy has already called for a bill that would require the U.S. to send weapons to arm the Ukrainian government, regardless of the administration's policy decision. Oh, great, a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia. What could possibly go wrong? And of course, when it comes to arming rebels, Mr. Siding with Democracy McCain does not discriminate. See, Ukraine is just the latest on a laundry list of countries he's advocated on behalf of. Before Kiev, there was Syria, where McCain famously posed with rebels on the ground while he called for the U.S. to arm them. Lebanese press identified 2 of the men in that photo as kidnappers of 11 Lebanese Shiite pilgrims, which McCain's spokesperson called unfortunate if true. Amazingly, it was during the Syria campaign when the senator declared, "Thank God for the Saudis," as they were even more enthusiastic about the extremist partnership than he. Yes, thank God for Saudi Arabia, the country that funds Islamic terrorism worldwide. And thanks to McCain's noble efforts in Syria, ISIS is now gaining more support than ever before, with the U.S. bombing campaign well underway. Apparently, McCain never learned from Libya, another country which he pleaded for Western intervention in, which is now a failed state. His numerous visits to rebel strongholds there resulted in a NATO-backed no-fly zone and bombing campaign of the country. Eventually, his rebel buds sodomized Gaddafi to death in the streets. What nice guys! McCain doesn't just love running around the planet and giving guns to extremists, though. He also has a particular fondness for official terrorists, at least former ones. Yes, McCain and the Bush administration once used Saddam's support for terrorist organization MEK, Mujahideen al-Khalq, as one of the main reasons to invade Iraq. MEK was officially listed on the State Department's list of terrorist organizations, having been responsible for a series of bombings and assassinations, including 6 American citizens. But just years later, McCain started cashing in from the group, becoming a fierce advocate to delist them as terrorists and co-sponsoring legislation that eventually did.
People's lives, like McCain is right now, by pushing for yet another war in the Middle East, you at least owe it to the American people to give Congress your full and undivided attention.
For example, when you guys pushed for the Iraq War and at a bare minimum, hundreds of thousands of civilians died, let alone over 5,000 U.S. troops, let alone the trillions of dollars we spent, that was a little bit more disgraceful than one of your elite buddies being bothered for about a minute and a half. But now, yeah, low-life scum. Wait, but McCain, you were the biggest cheerleader for Iraq. All those innocent civilians died, and look at what happened. Now ICE is running rampant throughout Iraq. So you spawned something worse than Al-Qaeda. What a horrible, disgraceful act. But for him, the biggest offense is to bother in the least bit the elites with their thin skin in the Capitol. One more outburst from McCain.
Well, the question is, why would John McCain bring in Henry Kissinger as an expert to tell us how we should move forward with U.S. foreign policy? From the time that in the late 90s, John McCain threw his lot in with the Project for the New American Century and the neocons, John McCain has been looking towards people who see militarism and U.S. intervention and the U.S. right to overthrow other governments as his ticket, I would say, for his personal ambitions. And I think really calling us low-life scum instead of looking at the record of Henry Kissinger, or let's just look at the record of John McCain himself and say these are not the people that we should be lionizing.
What's interesting of Kissinger and a militarized foreign policy, but the language used. Here are anti-war protesters in the Senate using their democratic right to protest, and he calls them low-life scum. And yet we're being told for the last 48 hours that John McCain was the embodiment of civility in U.S. politics. He was a bastion of decency. Even Bernie Sanders used that phrase. And yet even McCain himself probably wouldn't recognize that description. He was a well-known cranky and rude and abusive figure. He called anti-war protesters low-life scum. He mocked Chelsea Clinton as ugly. He made jokes about rape and spousal abuse. He famously called his Vietnamese captors gooks and said, "I won't apologize for that." He used the C word against his wife in public. He has a long history of not behaving in a civil manner. He ran a presidential campaign in 2008, Amy, where at the rallies of McCain and Palin, people shouted out, "Terrorist, traitor, off with his head, kill him," in reference to Barack Obama. Today we condemn Donald Trump for holding rallies where they say lock her up. Where is the condemnation of those rallies in 2008 that John McCain presided over?
Yes, protesting, one of the most notorious, vile war criminals in the world, apparently makes you low-life scum. Which is very interesting. You'd think that someone who was tortured for 5 years in a Vietnamese prison camp, largely as a result of Kissinger's policies, wouldn't be so apologetic. But then again, you'd also hope that someone who's seen the horrors of war firsthand wouldn't be at the front and center advocating to bomb people all over the world every chance he gets.
Apparently, John McCain thinks protesting war crimes makes you scum. That is very, very ugly. Kissinger was under any real threat is ridiculous. He was surrounded by security. But as cartoonist Matt Worker pointed out, the real takeaway here is that John McCain supports free speech pretty much everywhere in the world except the U.S. Senate. If you're a Syrian rebel or a French cartoonist, he's got your back. But if you're an American who just wants to call out one of the worst war criminals in our history, tough luck.
I am no fan of John McCain. John McCain does not necessarily deserve all of the admiration and praise that he is currently getting. I do understand that he is a war survivor, he is a torture survivor, and he is also, during his time in the Senate, was a strong advocate and critic for not torturing people. He was strongly against the Bush administration use of torture, but he damn sure supported their illegal wars. This is the same guy who on the 2008 campaign trail not only gave us Sarah Palin, but sang a little ditty about bombing Iran. Okay, John McCain is not a saint, not even close to it. But that doesn't mean...
Weapons manufacturers, it's all about the money, Lebowski. So they take some portion of that and they give it to the politicians. $30 million to Donald Trump, $3 million to Marco Rubio. By the way, over $7 million to John McCain.
and this is one that's not brought up nearly enough, and I haven't seen a single person in corporate media point this out since John McCain passed away. He voted against Martin Luther King Day. And it wasn't like, oh, it was like a 50-50 thing. No. The overwhelming majority was in favor of it. He was one of the few that voted against it. Now, you could say, oh, wait, that's symbolic, that's this, that's that. But again, that strikes me as a very political thing to do. You know, if you're a Republican politician and you know the record of conservatives on the issue of race in the U.S., and how the Republican Party, ever since the signing of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, they've been running the Southern strategy to appeal to, Southern whites. You're a Republican. If you vote against Martin Luther King Day, knowing what we know about the moral legacy of Martin Luther King, well, that tells me you're just a rank partisan actor in many respects. Tapper pointed out, he's polar opposite, quote, polar opposite of Donald Trump, and that's why he's getting so much praise these days. But he voted with Donald Trump 83% of the time. That's a real number, 83%. 538 tracks in the age of Trump what percentage a given politician votes with Trump. 83% is tremendously high. And by the way, some of those votes where he disagrees with Trump, I would say Trump is right. Like, I think McCain was for TPP. Trump, of course, pulled out of TPP. And by the way, he's still slipping in provisions of TPP into the renegotiation of NAFTA, which they're actually announcing right now, the renegotiation of NAFTA, as I speak right now to you. But so it's not even like where he disagrees with Trump, he's being a real maverick and that he's taking a moral stand. No, sometimes he's actually on the wrong side of it. So, and it's mixed. Sometimes he's right, sometimes Trump's right in the areas where they disagree. But when you agree with him over 83% of the time, you're not polar opposite. Now, some people pointed out to me on Twitter, and I knew I was going to get this response. Yes, but you have to understand that when we say he's polar opposite, we mean in temperament, we mean in civility, we mean in decorum. And my response to that is, then you're a sucker, because politics is not about if you're a mean tweeter or a nice tweeter. Politics is not about if you can give a wonderful, soaring, rhetorical, flowery speech. In fact, the whole point of those speeches is to divert you from the substance, which is how they're actually voting. So if you're willing to weigh, in an equal basis, their policies versus how they sound when they talk, well, you're begging to be misled. Because, of course, George W. Bush gave lovely speeches while he was bombing babies in Iraq. Does that mean, well, the bombing was wrong, but the speech was nice, so we give him a grade of like a C? No! That's not, you don't balance those two things. And then furthermore, it's actually not even true that, hey, he has decorum. Because McCain is known for having a very short fuse and a shitty temper. So it's not even true, even if I grant you the argument that we should care as much about decorum and civility versus policies. But I don't even grant that, because you shouldn't. The voting record is all that really matters. Now we get into the worst of the worst. That was just the appetizer for the bad stuff. But he voted for the Patriot Act. Unacceptable. Nobody gets to say they love the Constitution if they also voted for the Patriot Act, because that is diametrically opposed to the Constitution. You don't believe in due process. You don't believe in protection from cruel and unusual punishment. You don't believe in right to privacy. You don't believe in the government needing to get a warrant before they spy on you. So you don't get to say, I believe in the Constitution, and then vote for a piece of legislation that effectively overrides the Constitution and goes in the other direction. Nothing pisses me off more than that, because oftentimes the people who scream about being constitutionalist the most are the ones who voted for the Patriot Act, which destroys that whole notion, because you're the opposite of what you say you are. He voted for tax cuts for the rich, time and time and time again. So he doesn't get to say, I care deeply about the deficit. and I'm for the little guy. No, you don't care about the deficit, and you're not for the little guy because you keep voting for rich tax cuts. And by the way, that doesn't mean, oh, he's for tax cuts for the middle class, for example. In fact, I remember an analysis when he was running against Obama. CNN Money did this great analysis, and they showed how Obama actually cuts taxes more for 90% of the country. It's the 90% that are not the top 10%. He was the one who gave the giant tax cuts for the top 10%. He supported war in Syria and arming the rebels. By the way, it turns out the rebels were jihadists, so much so to the point that he went to Syria and he took pictures with some of the rebels, and people dug up the identities of the rebels and come to find out they are literally jihadists. So he has pictures with jihadists in Syria. Hey, gotta give him one thing. That certainly is being a maverick. That is quite mavericky of you. And he quite literally never met a war he didn't like. I don't know a single high-profile instance of, like, there being a national conversation and this giant propaganda push to go to war with country X, and he wasn't one of the loudest voices in favor of going to war with country X. And I think that's the heart of the problem with John McCain, is that he's the ultimate neocon war hawk. And look at the fawning reverence mainstream media is giving him right now, and mainstream politicians are giving him right now. And it's not just people on the Republican side. Barack Obama released a long statement about how John McCain is such a hero. Joe Biden, same thing. And corporate media in the U.S., which, remember, is supposed to be adversarial to power structures, they're basically doing a giant PR campaign and propaganda campaign in favor of John McCain right now. So, in other words, here's why that trick is so dirty and wrong. Because what you're doing is you're grandfathering in the worst aspects of his legacy and saying, effectively, this is what we all agree on, and this is not debatable. So it's taking off the table really horrendous and immoral decisions. Decisions like voting for the war in Iraq. Decisions like actively defending until his dying day the Saudi genocide of people in Yemen, including women and children. There's over 1 million cases of cholera because Saudi Arabia is blockading Yemen and not allowing in medicine to fix that cholera epidemic. So, at the same time he's being championed as a human rights hero, he was actively on the side of the human rights abuser in the worst humanitarian crisis today. Lockheed released a statement over John McCain's death and praised him. Why? Because he was the best for their profits of any elected official in the country. He never met a war he didn't like. He never met a brutal authoritarian regime he didn't want to arm. And he literally was willing to make the argument for Saudi Arabia as they killed women and children on purpose in Yemen. Remember, in Yemen, over 15,000 civilian deaths. They've bombed mosques. They've bombed open-air markets. They've bombed hospitals. They've bombed schools. They bombed a school bus recently with, 40 children or more on it? And all these people are being massacred with U.S. weapons. And we are giving the coordinates on the map to help Saudi Arabia carry out these atrocities. By the way, Saudi Arabia is bombing Houthi rebels. They're Shia. They're also arming on the ground with our weapons and money, by the way, Sunni militias who are fighting the Shia Houthi rebels. Those Sunni militias include Al-Qaeda. So as John McCain is willing to, as the media is propping up John McCain as some human rights, hero, and acting like, oh, he's such a moral character, till his dying breath, he supported a literal genocide in Yemen.
But these are statements that aren't just untrue, but the opposite is actually true. They're fundamentally incorrect. Saying that he's a warrior for peace is honestly a laughable assertion, with all due respect. He was someone who has vociferously advocated for war, perhaps more so than any other members of the Senate, with the exception of who? Maybe Lindsey Graham? And I mean, if he represents an unparalleled example of human decency, then human decency doesn't exist because, again, this is someone who wanted to invade multiple countries. There wasn't a war that he didn't advocate for and support and tried to goad politicians and presidents into supporting as well. So even if I understand that this is a really difficult time for his family right now, and I hope that he didn't suffer, I hope his last days on earth were peaceful, and I hope that his family has peace at this time, objectivity and truth, that matters, and it's too important. And if you follow the truth, then to even consider John McCain a hero is a disturbing thought. In the war, and as Max Blumenthal of Consortium News explains, during the Vietnam War, McCain had been captured by the North Vietnamese army after being shot down on his way to bomb a civilian light bulb factory. Now, even if it's the case that he was likely just following orders, you can't bomb a civilian light bulb factory. That's a war crime. Can we absolutely empathize with him on a human level that he was captured and tortured? Of course. That's awful. But what he was doing was not heroic. He was bombing a civilian facility that would have murdered innocent Vietnamese civilians in cold blood. That's not heroic American history. You would think that he'd have this sense that he has to stop wars at all costs. He saw war firsthand. He was a POW. He was tortured. So as someone in that position, you'd think the logical conclusion that he would draw in his mind, given his experience, would be that war is awful. We've got to stop it. But the opposite is what happened. He became one of the most, if not the loudest cheerleader for war throughout his career. And in 2013, Mother Jones put together this graphic showing just how many countries John McCain either wanted to escalate tensions with or outright invade. And this includes Nigeria, Mali, Sudan, Libya, Bosnia, Kosovo, Kuwait, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Georgia, Afghanistan, North Korea, Russia. And even though he didn't say we should outright invade China, he did make troubling comments saying, an Arab Spring would be coming to China, perhaps hoping that there would be regime change there. He was advocating for a new Cold War with Russia, and he would be one of the first people to speak out, trying to convince presidents to go to war in these countries that didn't attack us and didn't pose a threat to us in actuality. And in his attempts to promote war, he ended up inadvertently boosting the profile and trying to normalize, quite frankly, extremist groups that are really loathsome individuals in countries like Libya and Syria, and he met with a neo-Nazi opposition leader in Kiev. But normalizing these groups, even though he knew that it probably would be a risky situation and they weren't necessarily the best characters to get in bed with, well, normalizing them helped push this regime change narrative, since he presumably believed that they'd be able to take control of the country after the US invaded. And to him, he always spoke about war in a really cavalier way, so it didn't really matter who he was promoting. And when he was asked what we should do about Iran, well, this is what he said in 2008. To him, the idea of bombing and killing potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of individuals, it's a joke to him. He always spoke about war in a really cavalier way, which is weird because, again, he survived the Vietnam War. He was a POW. How can you advocate for war knowing what you went through and knowing that other individuals would inevitably be in that position? Being a hero requires you to speak out on things that might be unpopular, that might get people to hate you. But he was doing the bidding of his donors in the defense industry, even though deep down he knew that war was despicable and harmful and destructive. He pushed for it because he took money from the military-industrial complex. That's not heroic. That's not heroic at all. Additionally, he's someone who took great pride in his military service, and Yet, he was a staunch defender of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was a discriminatory Clinton-era policy that banned members of the LGBTQ community from serving openly in the military. So, even though he was really proud of his service, he didn't want members of the LGBT community to be able to serve and feel that pride that he felt about his service. Now, the thing about Don't Ask, Don't Tell is it wasn't just like they were forced to keep quiet. This program led to basically a witch hunt, a real witch hunt against service members who were potentially gay or presumed to be gay. They were going through their emails, they're trying to seek out gay people. And individuals were trying to explain this to John McCain, that it wasn't just that they had to keep quiet, they were looking for gay people, they were targeting them so they can kick them out of the military. And as he defended it, what did he do when he heard the evidence, when people testified to him and said, look, this is what's happening? He ignored it and repeated a lie over and over and over and over again, as you'll see. And the reason why it was so harmful that John McCain in particular spoke out in support of Don't Ask, Don't Tell was because a lot of individuals believe that he did have credibility when it comes to the military because he was a POW, he served in the military. So for him to say it, well, that kind of lends credence to the claim that, yeah, maybe gay people shouldn't serve openly in the military because it might actually disrupt, current military operations. It might become too big of a distraction. So that was really harmful. He fought for the oppression of gay people who were serving the country.
Now, George W. Bush's image has been rehabilitated among silly Democrats, centrist Democrats, and John McCain's image has been, restored in the minds and the eyes of silly centrist Democrats.
New York Times 538 reports McCain voting with Trump 83% of the time.
Well, that's right. I think we should really look at this in the larger context of the glorification of militarism, the way McCain was in favor of the expansion of NATO, threatening towards both China and Russia. This is all in the benefit of the weapons industry. We can see Lockheed Martin doing a eulogy, which they did for John McCain. So let's remember, we want to thank those who don't fight in wars, the conscientious objectors, the peacemakers, and recognize John McCain of a symbol of the glorification of military that we have to fight against.